So that happened. Welcome to John Clampett Show, episode number 19. I got my playoff rankings reaction, and a lot happened yesterday. I was watching the show last night. Major movement in the top 10. Alabama moved up from number 10 to number 9, and Notre Dame moved back from 9 to 10. The full top 25. It's Ohio State, Indiana, Georgia, Texas Tech moved up to 4, good for them. Oregon, Ole Miss moved up to 6, lost in all of this dramatic discussion between Alabama, Notre Dame, BYU, and Miami. Ole Miss moved up a spot despite losing their head coach. That's shocking to me. I am an advocate for them to be in the playoffs still. I do not think they should have moved up a spot at all. And that's major for seeding wise, which I'll get into later in this episode. Anyways, Ole Miss 6, A&M 7, Oklahoma 8, Alabama 9, Notre Dame 10, BYU 11, Miami 12, Texas 13, Vanderbilt 14, Utah 15, USC 16, Virginia 17, Arizona 18, Michigan 19, Tulane 20, Houston 21, Georgia Tech 22, Iowa 23, North Texas 24, and James Madison finally gets in the top 25 at number 25. So, obviously, the biggest shakeup in the rankings was Alabama jumping Notre Dame. Last night, as I was watching the show, I hated that. I didn't understand the move. Obviously, as a Notre Dame fan, I hated it. It made me really nervous. I didn't understand the move at all. I couldn't wrap my head around why it happened. On the show last night, the committee chair said that it's because Alabama's win against Auburn was impressive. I've been thinking about that all last night, and that whole bubble area. I've been thinking about that all last night and all day today. And the more that I think about it, the more I understand why the movement happened, and I understand what the playoff committee is trying to do. Notre Dame fans, contrary to popular opinion right now, I don't think there's a whole lot to worry about. Miami fans are not going to like this. So Alabama moved up not because they were impressed with the win over Auburn and whatnot. They said they were impressed with Alabama going up 17-0 and then pulling out the close victory over a 5-7 Auburn. Notre Dame went up 42-3 in their game against a bad team as well. Alabama did not move up because the committee was impressed with their win. Alabama moved up because they're in the SEC championship game, and they don't anticipate Alabama winning that game. So they moved up Alabama as an insurance policy for the Tide. In the case that they were to lose, they can still drop them a spot like normal, because last year the committee showed that teams in championship games can lose the game and drop in the rankings, but they won't drop out of the playoff. Moving Alabama up allows for that to happen. They're anticipating Georgia to beat Alabama in the SEC championship game. Probably not going to be a blowout, but a close loss. So they're anticipating moving Alabama back to 10 after the games on Saturday. That's why Alabama jumped Notre Dame. The committee chair also said last night that idle teams can still move when Reese Davis asked him about, he was alluding more specifically to Notre Dame and Miami. The chair did not specifically mention Notre Dame or Miami. He did say idle teams can still move. And the kicker here is that when he was saying that, he mentioned strength of schedule movement as a cause for idle teams moving. Miami, their strength of schedule cannot improve. Their strength of schedule is set. They don't have any opponents playing in any conference championship games this weekend. Notre Dame's strength of schedule is not set. Notre Dame has an opponent playing in a conference championship game this weekend in Boise State. And if Boise State wins their conference championship game, that will improve Notre Dame's strength of schedule. On Mike Golick Jr.'s show that I saw this morning, the committee chair, Hunter Yurachek, said more specifically when talking about Notre Dame, BYU, and Miami, that they're in the same pool, comparison pool. It's been Alabama, Notre Dame, BYU, Miami for the past 2 or 3 weeks, however long they've been in the same pool together, and they've picked Notre Dame over Miami and BYU consistently, and they did it again last night. They said Notre Dame is deserving of being ranked ahead of BYU. BYU is deserving of being ranked ahead of Miami. So by saying that, they're saying that Miami is not deserving of being ranked ahead of Notre Dame. Miami not playing and Notre Dame not playing is not going to change that. BYU plays, if they lose close, they'll probably stay put at 11. If they get blown out, then Miami might pass them. But as it stands now, it doesn't appear that there's a path for Miami outside of Alabama and BYU both getting blown out in the championship games. Then maybe Miami sneaks in because those two teams end up being eliminated and Notre Dame moves up. But based on what Hunter Yurachek is saying, it doesn't sound like they're going to move Miami ahead of Notre Dame. More on Boise State improving Notre Dame's strength of schedule. Auto bids in general in this playoff format are horrible because the current template for auto bids being included into this format of playoffs still allows Duke, an 8-5 team, to have a shot at getting into the playoffs. And it allows for a 9-4 Boise State team to have a shot at getting into the playoffs. They're not eliminated from the playoff discussion. If Duke beats Virginia and James Madison loses to Troy, then Duke can get an auto bid in the playoffs because they would be one of the highest ranked conference champions. They would be ahead of James Madison. The same goes for Boise State. If Boise State wins and Duke wins and James Madison loses, it's going to come down to Duke or Boise State, who is 8-5 and 9-4. They do not deserve to be in the playoffs. I don't care if they're one of 5 highest ranked conference champions. Duke's 8-5. Boise State's 9-4. They should not be getting into the playoffs. They should not be taking the spot of a 11-2 BYU, a 10-2 Miami, a 10-2 Notre Dame, even a 9-3 Texas and 10-2 Vandy. They're not deserving a playoff spot. So there needs to be some kind of caveat when it comes to auto bids that says if you're not ranked in the top 15 or the top 20 overall, then you don't get an auto bid into the playoffs. That's my opinion on that. The auto bid format sucks. Now now back to Alabama, Notre Dame, BYU, Miami. There's some interesting scenarios here. If Alabama loses close, does the committee move them back or keep them at 9? I don't know what they're going to do if Alabama loses close. I would be fine with either one. The reason I don't think Miami is going to get in that scenario is because if BYU loses, and say BYU and Alabama both lose close, Alabama moves back one spot, it would make sense to move BYU back one spot. Is Miami, by not playing, or is the committee going to say Miami should jump Alabama too? And Notre Dame? That's unlikely. They'll probably just flip Alabama and Notre Dame back. Now say Alabama wins, they're automatically in. BYU loses, big or close, whatever. Miami gets compared to Notre Dame again, this time directly. They have the head-to-head, but they've been in the same comparison pool for the past 3 weeks. And it's been Notre Dame ahead of Miami because BYU is also ahead of Miami. It wouldn't make sense for them to not be playing to jump Miami ahead of Notre Dame just because. BYU wins, then Notre Dame fans should start being a little nervous. Miami's doesn't appear to be a threat, I don't think. BYU wins, then it's going to come down to Notre Dame and Alabama. If Alabama loses close, they're probably going to take Alabama because they moved them up one, and you don't punish conference championship runner-ups for losing a third game. Now, if Alabama gets, or not for losing a third game, but for losing the extra game. If Alabama gets blown out, then they probably would take Notre Dame in that scenario, and Alabama would get left out. So some of these scenarios among those 4 teams are going to be something to monitor. As it stands now, my reasoning for Miami not passing Notre Dame, like I said earlier, it's just wouldn't make sense because they're not playing. There's a whole bunch of other information out as well that would pretty much show that the committee is going to stick with Notre Dame, such as things like Vegas odds. BYU's odds to win the Big 12 championship are the exact opposite of Notre Dame's odds to make the playoffs. Those things mirroring each other makes it seem like if BYU loses, Notre Dame's in. If BYU wins, Notre Dame is probably going to be out. But Miami doesn't really fall into that scenario, unfortunately for Canes fans. That's kind of my reaction to the playoffs. That's what I think is going to happen. I think Miami's kind of getting screwed. I don't think Miami is going to have a path into the playoffs outside of BYU and Alabama both getting blown out. Now, if Alabama gets blown out and BYU loses close, could Miami jump BYU in that situation? It's possible. I don't think they'll do it, though, because then you would technically be punishing a team for playing an extra game when if BYU had just stayed at home, then Alabama would be out and BYU would be in. So, to me, I just don't see a path where Miami can get into the playoffs with how they did it last night, which is unfortunate for Miami fans. Great for Notre Dame fans. I'm actually pretty happy with Notre Dame's situation right now. I don't think they're going to get bumped out, and I understand why the committee is protecting Alabama by moving them up to the 9 seed in case they lose a close game. Now, as far as the seeding goes, I mentioned this with Ole Miss bumping up, even though they lost their coach, right? Ole Miss was number 7. Texas A&M is now number 7 after the loss to Texas. I thought A&M would be 6, and Ole Miss would be 7. With Ole Miss at 6, that now puts them in a home game against either the ACC champion or the American champion. At 7, A&M is now in a spot where they would be in a home game and end up playing, more than likely, Notre Dame or Alabama. That 6th spot is a much, much more enviable spot to be in than the 7 seed. Because that 10 seed is either going to be a 10-3 Alabama team, who is better than the ACC or American champion, or a 10-2 Notre Dame team, who A&M actually played already. And it is really difficult to beat a team twice. That 8-9 spot, I've seen Ohio State fans on Twitter saying if they get the 1 seed and beat Indiana in the Big Ten Championship, that 8-9 spot is a lot more attractive if Notre Dame is not the 9 seed. They would much rather play Oklahoma or Alabama than Notre Dame. So it seems like fan bases don't want to play Notre Dame in the first round. And in A&M's case, they definitely don't want to play Notre Dame, and they probably don't want to play Alabama as opposed to Virginia or North Texas. Those are the teams I'm predicting to win those conference games, so I think they'll be in at the 11 and 12 spots. So Ole Miss bumping up is huge for them, especially since they lost their coach. They're going to have a much easier first-round game than Texas A&M is probably going to have. So they might actually make it past the first round, even though they have an interim head coach. Which, awesome for Ole Miss. I didn't think that was going to happen. I definitely thought the committee was going to punish Ole Miss for losing their head coach before the playoffs. But yeah, that's kind of how I foresee it happening. That's really all I have for the rankings reaction. Miami, I think, is getting kind of screwed. BYU is in a win and in situation, lose, and they're out. Notre Dame and Alabama have pretty good odds of staying in the playoffs as long as Alabama doesn't get blown out. And for Notre Dame's case, BYU and Alabama don't both win. Yeah, Miami's pretty much out in my opinion. Unfortunately, I think they're better than some of the teams in the playoffs, but they're getting screwed because of the 2 games they lost in the middle of the season that they shouldn't have lost. It's unfortunate for them, but don't lose to mediocre teams, I guess. That's all I have for today's episode. Tomorrow, I have my championship game picks and previews for this weekend. I will be having a guest. My roommate, Philip Jacobs, will be giving his picks as well. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss when I put the content out, and turn notifications on so you get the alerts when I do post videos. Like this video. Let me know if you agree or disagree with my sentiment of the playoffs in the comments. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on the John Clanton Show.